Yeah, let's go ahead and kick it off officially. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Brennan Lentz, Director of Student Services with Promineo Tech. And today we have Jeff Haupt. Jeff is a graduate of our backend software developer program. He is a mentor. He is a previous lead mentor for Promineo Tech. He is a current instructor, former lawyer, and now software developer for the city of South Bend. Jeff made the transition recently from practicing law to coding full-time. And we wanted to ask Jeff to come take some questions and talk a little bit about employment law. This is something that Jeff covered. It was in his portfolio as an attorney, and he graciously volunteered to share some of his knowledge in that specialized field. Jeff, the first question that prompted this original discussion, I believe, was around how many interviews is too many. Someone was maybe had gone on a large number of interviews, and or I don't know if this was the one that prompted it, but this does come up. How many interviews is too many to go on, or is there too many in terms of job search?
It's from a legal standpoint, there is no answer on that. From being just an older person and somebody that's interviewed several times, I would say representing the HR department for a bit, we had a 2 to 3 interview process, and 3 was more the director level type of position. That's definitely more of a question of is it a company that's going to make decisions, or is it a company that's kind of just lost and is too scared to pull the trigger on anything? I would say for that particular question, there's no real legal guidance on it, although I'm kind of curious if you start adding in take-home questionnaires and things of that nature, and they have you do coding sort of assignments that almost are a little too real world and seem like they could end up in somebody's code. I think you could have something a little actionable there if it didn't turn into an actual job offer, but they did use some of the code you produced in a coding assignment.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like there's no one size fits all answer, but you sort of have to use your, I guess, discrimination.
Trust your instincts. Yeah. If you feel like you're just spinning your wheels on it and you're kind of like, what else do I have to say? And yet you're coming back to another interview. I think that should tell you a lot about the particular company you're talking to.
Mm-hmm. Did you, in your own experience with job search, did you have any situations where you felt like they were asking you for too much code, or they were going to maybe use some of the code you wrote in production?
No, it's funny. I only had to do, the few interviews I did before I decided to take the job I only did one sort of take-home type of coding assignment, and it was more or less understanding how APIs work. So it's not even anything that could have been used. My knowledge could not have been used to further something in their product line. It was more of do you understand kind of what we're doing and what our industry is about. So I think I'm kind of fortunate in that. I've heard other stories where people had to do monstrous coding assignments and 4 or 5 rounds of interviews only to get denied a job a month after the last interview. I would say, especially an entry level, just be cautious, because unfortunately the world has great people, and the world has people that are looking to get as little or as much as they can for as little as possible, and just listen to your instincts on that. And if your gut's telling you something seems off, probably 9 times out of 10 it is. So I was fortunate that I did not have to do it more than once, but that did give me a second interview. So
Mhm. Yeah, Renee is concurring. Trust your gut. The other thing I'll just add to that is if you find yourself in a situation you're not sure if something's right, post a question in Slack. There's a ton of people there that are going to respond that have experience, that are happy to be a sounding board to help you in your journey. Jeff, what about unpaid internships? This topic comes up a good amount. Is that something people should steer clear of? Should they consider it depending on the opportunity? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it can be very beneficial because I know with the city of South Bend, we have paid and unpaid. The paid basically just become employees because of the way sort of public sector workers have to be tied in. But unpaid, the way the Department of Labor looks at this and the the Fair Labor Standards Act looks at it is it's essentially has to be more of a benefit to the student and almost a burden to the employer. There is this 7-factor test, but it's just, I mean, really it kind of boils down to like, hey, is the student going to get more out of this than the employer? The people would think, well, why do employers want to do this? Well, it's a pipeline for potential employees. It gives you a chance to try somebody out, so to speak, for 12 months to see how they take direction, to see what their code looks like, to see if they can learn, how to clean things up. So there's some benefit there for the employers because, you get a chance to see how does this person work with the team we already have in place, instead of hiring somebody off of 2 interviews and, not having any sort of idea of how they're going to work out. This gives the employer a chance to say, okay, everybody on the team liked this person or liked him or her. They seem to work well with people. They seem to be coachable, had a good attitude coming in every day, asked questions when they knew. So, it makes sense to bring them on. But that said, things that you need to watch out for is that how long is it going to be for? What questions you need to ask? Are you going to get assigned a mentor there or somebody that's going to be sort of the person that guides you along in this period of time? Anything that's sort of this sort of like, I don't know, basically a internship with no endpoint, and then also an internship with no real, we have people that are in charge of our interns, or even like one person that kind of guides our interns and answers interns questions. Those are going to be problematic. I think you're going to find that those are going to be people looking to try to get, work for free. Bottom line is the way the Department of Labor looks at it is the intern has to benefit more than the employer. It's almost got to be like a burden on the employer for that period of time. So I wouldn't say stay away from them. I would say that if you feel like it's a good fit for you, consider it, but also ask a lot of questions about what sort of supervision am I going to receive? What sort of, guidance will I get? Will I have regular meetings to check in about how my code's going, or what kind of projects am I going to be working on? Because again, if you're not getting paid for it from a personal standpoint, you really need to figure out a way, and a legal standpoint, how are you going to best benefit from this? Not to knock WordPress because, I'm the poor guy that got stuck dealing with all of our old WordPress sites at the city. But, if you're getting sort of an internship to add plugins to WordPress, yeah, it's probably not worth your time. But if you're getting to do some stuff with a cool company, doesn't have to be a large company, but even a small company, and they're letting you kind of sit and be part of a team building out a new product, that could be worth your 12 to 16 weeks of time to build out that.
I see some, Renee posted a question in chat. If you have questions as we go, throw them in the chat and I will present those to Jeff as well. I really like, Jeff, the idea of having a list of questions to ask an employer before you take an internship.
Mhm.
What do you think about, I mean, I think that's a great idea for even just a regular position, but probably more important for an internship. What are your thoughts about maybe in that list of questions, maybe stating what it is that you want to work on and asking, is it possible? These are the skill sets I'd like to improve from an internship. Do you think that's something candidates could ask?
Yeah, I think it's almost something that they should, because I think that's going to give you a lot of kind of clear, understanding of what they're seeing this position to be. Mm-hmm. And it could be just, simply the answer would be like, hey, we really don't do that here. If it's like, hey, I want to build out, Spring Boot programs, for instance, I really want to work on that. And they can be like, look, we're a Python environment, and that's, we're not really looking to change that up. So that kind of helps you out too, because if that's really what you're looking for, is that experience in, a particular language or a particular type of development, then that'll help you sort of figure out if that's the spot for you. But at the same token, it also gives you that clarity of, is what I'm about to do like on the up and up, meeting with the Department of Labor definitions and the Supreme Court definitions of what really qualifies as an internship, so that somebody doesn't have to pay you. Just to kind of add that too on the internship topic, to think about, like, it's almost unheard of for like any decent company, like for-profit company, to truly bring in unpaid internships. It's really just hard for them to meet those requirements of, is this person benefiting more than us? And a lot of times you'll find nonprofits are probably your best places to do internships because of that reason. But at the same token, the beauty about the for-profit is a lot of them will pay something. When I was before prepping for today, I was just kind of looking over some like Indeed postings for internships and just seeing what they're putting out there. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like 3/4 of their HR staff has no idea about like the FLSA requirements of internships, because they're calling them internships, but they're saying we want this experience and this particular skill set. There's something to say, hey, this is what we do. This is the skill sets we build out on. But, to sit there and say, we're expecting somebody like a rock star to come in here, yeah, it's an internship. Mm-hmm. No. I mean, you should be a bumbling idiot walking into an internship, and they should be perfectly okay with that.
So if someone is looking at a internship and it's unpaid, it sounds like you'd want to be extra critical, extra careful before accepting an unpaid internship. Ask a lot of good questions.
Yes. Really
vet the company, make sure they're on the up and up, because it sounds like most companies today, any decent company that's offering an internship is going to do it paid anyway. It may be nominal pay, but they're going to pay.
Yeah, they're going to at least give you, probably almost double minimum wage at this point. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, I did see a few out there that weren't paid, or, we're trying to build out like, different types of what they called internships, but it just seemed like ones I would recommend people steer clear from, because it definitely, as Renee posted, there's a fact sheet out there that is very easy for employers to find, and they should be able to follow that. But a lot of times, just like employees will oversell their qualifications, employers will oversell positions sometimes too. So I think that's a part of what you see with those types of things. But don't give up on the internship idea if it's, if there's, like, you could tell by researching the company that people have this pathway to employment potentially. because then I think that is a good spot for people looking at more the personality. Again, learning how to code. I mean, I'm still learning, and it's one of those things that you're going to continue to do your first few years out, and then you're going to continue to do, but not at the same scale even after that. But internships should really be looking for who you are as a person, team player, your ability to be coachable. Are you likable?
Yeah. Question that came in, why aren't paid interns considered employees?
They actually are under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So yeah, the moment you get paid, or if you're trading basically knowledge time, anything like that for per hour, per month, or any sort of salary, at that point, the Department of Labor looks at you as an employee, an employer and employee relationship. Now, probably what some people might try to say is they might try to talk about things being like stipends.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question becomes there is what a lot of legal questions become is, yeah, you might have something actionable, but is it worth really, going down that path, or is it better to just move on?
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, once you're getting paid, you're an employee under the United States Department of Labor definitions. So.
Mm-hmm. So someone might be listening to this and say, "Hey, Jeff, if none of this stuff is actionable, why is it even important? Why should I even care about the legality around the law? I'm not gonna go. I can't hire a lawyer to fight this."
Well, I think it tells you a lot about the company for starters. Because companies that are going to do it right typically are going to be decent companies to work for. They're not going to, try to intentionally cut corners on, pay, benefits, safety. They're going to put you in an asbestos-filled building to, write code in. You're going to see that sort of thing where it tells you a lot about the company, and it also tells you, oh geez, is this a company that I could get investigated by the Department of Labor for some things down the line and might shut them down? And even if I do have a job, I think there's honest mistakes out there. In this sort of thing, you might have a design house, but just fresh off the ground, couple owners, 2 or 3 employees, and they're trying to do things right. So again, trust your gut on that part, but for the most part, if you're talking to somebody and it's like, man, this doesn't sound like anything like that I read on that Department of Labor sheet or things like that. I mean, they're telling me they're not going to pay me, but they're kind of wanting to know how many hours I can put in and how much knowledge I have in a particular tech stack. That's going to tell you they're going to skirt the law in other areas too. When it comes to like trying to get time off for any sort of they're kind of screwed if they've got a certain number of employees for things like the Family Medical Leave Act, but state law kind of comes into play a little bit too on smaller employees. So you'd be surprised how much just these sort of things can tell you about the company that you work for. And yes, maybe you're not going to go seek legal advice in the moment, but it at least kind of helps feed your instincts a little bit better to get a sense of whether or not this is something I should do.
Yeah. So you mentioned an acronym some people may not be familiar with, the FLSA. Can you talk about that a little? Just give a quick overview. And is that something that's important for people to be aware of?
Yeah, it basically covers everything of employment-related relationships. Fair Labor Standards Act has been around for a long time. I don't remember the specifics date-wise, but it governs basically everything from employee definitions, like who becomes an employee, independent contractors, which, something, again, to think about in the changing world that we're in, as far as the workplace relationships. It governs, a section of it governs overtime requirements and like who is technically a salaried individual for calculating overtime. It's a very broad, group of statutes on the federal level. And then on top of it, state law can have additional things that they can require for employers as well. And that can vary from, you're going to find certain states that have very employee-friendly statutes, and then a lot of states that have very employer-friendly statutes. But yeah, the FLSA is basically the book on employment law in America.
Mm-hmm. So kind of in today's world, post-COVID world, a lot of distributed teams. Yep. People working in different states, working in a different state than maybe the company is. How do you think about that? What can you talk about that? And when it comes to state law?
Yeah, so in that sort of scenario, more than likely the federal law is going to trump the state law. So because of just the way our breakdown in government is built up, that the federal law has control over everything that's called interstate commerce. And so if a company that's operating in multiple states are generally going to be considered, under the interstate commerce clause of the Constitution, we're governed by that. So if a state really tries to do something outside the norm, now, like for instance, states can set different unemployment benefits amounts and requirements, and that's fine because cost of living issues, and it's cheaper to be in Indiana than it is in California. But at the same time, like if you're saying, hey, we're requiring particulars that, as you said, post-COVID, you're going to see a lot of weird litigation happening with like different states doing different mandates for, vaccination or testing requirements. What's that going to look like once it hits the courts? But yeah, for the most part, like states that require health insurance, I think there's only Massachusetts, if I'm not mistaken. But that is one of those things that the Affordable Care Act already kind of took care of for like employees over a certain, employers with a certain number of employees. So Massachusetts law is not really impacting other companies, but that was primarily a prime example of when they enacted that. And then when they, the Affordable Care Act got passed a couple years after, they actually kind of use it as a model. So that sort of dealt a blow to all the lawsuits in Massachusetts. Again, I think it was Massachusetts, but it dealt a blow to all the state lawsuits.
Yeah. So it sounds like it is in your interest in the job search to familiarize yourself with the FLSA and your states, some of your states.
Yeah. There's the Department of Labor, they actually put out some really good guidelines that just like, don't read like legalese. When you get into that stuff from like my past life, you're arguing over some, obscure stuff and like newer definitions or case law interpretation. But for 90% of everything that you run into your day to day, there's just different fact sheets and guidelines that the Department of Labor puts out that are just really helpful to read, and they're written, from the non-lawyer standpoint. So, it's not going to be difficult to really kind of understand like, oh, okay, yeah, this is what I should be looking at. So,
what's the difference between an employee and a contractor, and why is it important to know the difference?
It's kind of huge for the independent contractor. It's very beneficial to the employer if they can pull it off. So that's kind of a moving target. All the delivery apps sort of really amped up this discussion quite a bit. But yeah, so from a baseline standpoint, like when I used to run my own law practice, I was a clear independent contractor to my clients because I completely had say in how I managed their case. I had say in how I ran my business. I had say in what I accepted, what I didn't accept. So basically, I could make a profit or a loss. And it was all on how I ran my business. That's the clear definition of like, you hire somebody to paint your house. He or she comes in, they say, hey, I'll do it for, I'll do these 3 rooms for $800, $900. And they, for some reason, end up having to spend $1,000. That's on you, or that's on them. So they lost $100 painting your house. That's kind of that big question of independent contractors versus employers is, do you have complete control, or not complete control, but most control over how things get done in that particular assignment? There is a lot of other things. They recently changed it under the past administration, as far as defining that, but that's like an administrative definition. So the problem that you're going to have is it's sort of getting redefined now. But a lot of the big items is who has more control in the relationship? Is there a potential for profit or loss from the independent contractor's standpoint? And then does the independent contractor kind of come in with a certain amount of control, being able to use their own tools of the trade, so to speak? So you do see this cropping up more and more in almost every field. The software developer world's not immune to it.
Yeah. Is one more, would you suggest people try to become an independent contractor or an employee, or is one better than the other?
I think it depends on your level of risk that you like in your own life. Mm-hmm. Because the independent contractor thing, first of all, you don't know how long the work's going to be there. Sometimes you can sign a contract saying, I'm going to get paid this much, at least for, I know it when when I was working in the legal department of the city, we would have these contracts that I used to argue all the time that they're employment contracts. They're not independent contractor contracts, but certain department heads liked them, and half the team felt one way about them, half the legal team felt another way about them. But yeah, so it was basically like, hey, it's this year-long contract. You're going to get paid, $1,200 per week every year, or for 52 weeks, and you're not going to put in more than, I think it was like 1,900 hours. Like, well, that sounds like an employee to me. Like, it's mm-hmm. minus the benefits. Right. So that's where the employer benefits quite a bit, because they get to skirt quite a few things if they can define you as an independent contractor. Mm-hmm. They do not have to provide you healthcare benefits under the Affordable Care Act. They don't have to provide you FMLA time. They don't have to really pay any sort of unemployment insurance for you. The list goes on and on.
So would you say if you're being offered a role and it's independent contractor and you're considering it, you might want to try to negotiate significantly more money up front because of that?
Yeah, because now even the other thing, just right off the top of your head, or to the top, you're paying 9 to 10% more in taxes, because when you're employed, your employer's picking up half of your Social Security and FICA taxes, which is about 9 something percent right now. Mm-hmm. But when you're self-employed, you're picking those up, plus your part that you had to pay as an employee. So you're automatically paying 17% of whatever income, or income after losses. So
there's more. It sounds like there's more flexibility with an independent contractor role, but also a lot more risk and a lot more moving pieces.
Yeah, and this is where you have to be cautious, because if they're trying to interview for you and it sounds like a job, but they're trying to get you to be an independent contractor, chances are, it probably wouldn't pass the muster.
So would that be a red flag if you were interviewed? Like, generally, if someone posts a job and they don't otherwise say, would you assume that it's Could you
No,
assume or no?
I think, I mean, it's still one of those things you come in and you ask a lot of questions about because, I mean, if it doesn't turn out right for you, you actually have a lot of sort of uh, pull in that one, believe it or not, because there's a lot of enforcement effort in the misclassification of employers versus independent contractors because of the taxation issue.
Hmm.
So if you decided to, you're doing something, you thought, hey, I'm misclassified, I'm tired of paying all these taxes and not getting these benefits, you can contact the Department of Labor and the employer. Like you don't even have to get an attorney on that. The employer can be on the hook for quite a bit in terms of back taxes, penalties, owing you your portion of taxes that they should have paid. So it's one of those weird things that some people are trying to skirt it as much as possible because yeah, benefits are expensive. Losing an employee for 12 weeks of FMLA time's expensive. But again, yeah, it depends on your level of risk as far as whether it's worth it or not. You might be like, you know, I like this idea of doing this for a year and then maybe trying to find something else or, just doing this job to job.
Hmm.
There's a lot of freelance developers out there that are perfectly happy popping into a company and building out like a part of an app, for instance, that their knowledge base is in, and then taking off and going to the next job. Yeah, I mean, web developers do that constantly. I mean, there's a big market in that.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, it can be cool. You can be very flexible in how you do your work, but at the same token, you got to you could have a hell of a great month and then 3 4 months where nothing's coming in and you have to
Yeah.
sort of balance that out.
Yeah. So do your research, check it out,
Mhm.
talk to people, get some
Yeah.
advice around those topics.
Yep.
There's a follow-up question. I think this was a question from the earlier question that came in. It sounds like a specific case, this situation this individual had. The follow-up question was, so why does employment clock restart when transitioning from intern to full-time?
In the sense of employment clock, I guess I'm a little confused about that. If they're referencing the sort of a probationary period, um, I mean probationary periods are sort of like a misdefined thing, anyways, because if you're in an at-will state, they can cut you the next week after they hire you, and you still have certain protections under like if you're of a protected class under the EEOC. Um, but as far as like certain benefits go, I think like the any sort of medical benefits or anything like that that are governed by the Affordable Care Act or FMLA do have a time period. So that's where that classification can be very important because if you truly are an intern, you're not classified as an employee. If you are getting paid, but they're calling it an internship, you should be trying to argue that with HR because you're now getting paid or you're paid. So you're an employee. You might be a part-time employee. You might be, classified as something within the company internally as a different type of employee. But from the Fair Labor Standards Act or Department of Labor, you're an employee. I mean, you're getting a wage for trade and time, value, skill. Now it's like, okay, how much are you getting paid? Are you at least getting minimum wage? Um, I think if anybody's paying anybody, they're at least giving that. But yeah, other benefits can start to kick in too. So,
Mhm.
but again, that might be where they're looking at like an hourly, like if you're only in, even if they call it an internship, but you're an employee, but they only have you there for like 25 hours a week. Some of these protections don't kick in until you're considered, 32 plus hour a week employee or, something along those lines. So just depending on what the particular law or protection you're looking for is. So
Mhm.
that's probably where that they feel comfortable in resetting that clock on you, so to speak, is that if you went from being sort of a part-time employee to a full-time, but if you were an unpaid intern, that is different than actually being classified as an employee, so they can do that.
Mhm. What about questions around what employers can ask during an interview?
Yeah,
This one came up. Can someone ask about my salary history in an interview?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they can. Yeah, those aren't really like any sort of questions regarding those type of things are very, very, fair questions. Questions that are going to run you afoul of the EEOC, anything dealing with like disabilities, other than, if there's questions about, you're allowed to ask if somebody might need reasonable accommodations to fill out an application or to, being in the interview, perhaps if you're interviewing somebody that can't sit still for X number of time without like just having some sort of significant pain, reasonable accommodation would be like, hey, let's chat for 10 minutes. Let's take a couple minute break and then come back. So those are questions that are definitely off. Anything like, have you ever had any major surgeries before? Anything like learning disabilities, things of that nature. Those are going to get you in trouble. There's a lot of questions that like shouldn't be asked, but aren't necessarily going to run afoul of the law. But some could. For instance, if you're, being interviewed by somebody and they start asking a lot of like very personal type questions about, like preferences of dating partners, things like that. Those can lead into like some sort of sexual harassment type question or issues. Pregnancy type things. I mean, for women in the workforce, those are big. Those are definitely not allowed. Questions about starting families.
So what should someone do though? Like that's the law, but let's say now you're in the interview.
Mm-hmm.
What should you do if you're asked one of these questions that you know or suspect isn't really appropriate and you're not comfortable with?
Yeah, I mean, they should know that going in. And honestly, if you bring that up and just say, hey, I'm not, I don't want to answer that question, or, I don't think that a question is appropriate. That might, kind of kill the interview for you right then and there. But again, that's probably not a bad thing. The other issues, it might not kill the interview because, now, again, that's something you can report to the EEOC. You don't actually have to hire a lawyer for that. The only problem is that typically becomes a, he said, she said, they said sort of scenario. But yeah, it's, again, just, you might not sue somebody over it, but it is one of those things where let it sort of help guide your gut again.
Another question that came in, what's the difference between temp versus independent contractor or intern? Are those all different terms?
They are. Temporary workers typically are going to be somebody that's an employee, but for a set period of time, their benefits are getting paid, like a true temporary worker. That's kind of changed a lot over the course of the past couple decades, because a lot of times when you think of temporary workers, you think like, okay, I'm going to go work for a staffing agency and they are going to be my employer and assign me out to different assignments. You see that a lot in like warehouse work, manufacturing work, some sort of office admin work. But yeah, the idea, it's not going to be an independent contractor, because from that standpoint, if you're just signing for a certain period of time, but they're going to have control over the work, they're going to provide you all the equipment, they're going to expect you to show up to a certain location every day from like 8 to 5, you're an employee. And, it's just you're an employee for only a year or however long your contract is going to run. And then obviously interns, as we kind of discussed earlier, is in theory, they should be unpaid. and the intern it should be like a complete detriment to the employer other than, hey, we're getting to see if this person could fit our culture in 12 to 16 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Another question came in from Nick Bearclow. What types of questions should you ask a staffing company if you're going through a staffing company as a contract developer to an employer? For example, you take a job with Tech Systems working at GoDaddy on a 6-month contract to hire.
Yeah, that's kind of tough from that standpoint, because I think that's a little bit away from a legal question and more of a how comfortable are you with sort of that environment? But I think probably the question I would ask in that environment is, what's your rate of placement after a contract's finished? Like, can I talk to other people that currently work with you under this sort of scenario? Because in some instances, it's, they're, especially in like a tech field, I mean, there's quite a bit of like headhunter market, so to speak. So, people shouldn't be scared to answer those questions for you. Like, what's the turnaround from like job to job? Obviously something where it's like, there's not a big need, like, do you have a pulse and can you lift 20 pounds? They could probably turn you around and have you a job the next day. But where it's like, hey, do you have this certain tech stack? It might take a little bit longer to find you placement. And I think having that understanding is probably going to be key for that relationship to work.
Mm-hmm. What other?
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to add on benefits. Probably is a good one, because if they are employing you, I think that's a fair question to start asking.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other topics around job search that you wanted to cover, whether it's the legal aspects or just practical aspects?
Yeah, I think from the legal standpoint, a lot of it's still going to just be trusting your gut on it. I mean, like I said, a lot of things aren't going to be, even if you have, a case, you're not going to run out and make a case about it, but just let that be a guiding light for you. That if you feel like, geez, I'm being asked a bunch of inappropriate questions, or, a bunch of questions about like, what am I going to be up to the next couple of years? They're trying to pick your brain to see if you're going to take FMLA for, 12 weeks because, you and your significant other want to start a family. So, the other thing to kind of think about too is, being in a protected class. And actually, it's interesting because of the way this moves. Like now, I'm in a protected class of, being over 40. So, but at the same token, just kind of know some of those rights around that and how those things change, because, surprising. I mean, with the current makeup of the Supreme Court, regardless of like political views or whatnot, there was a surprising decision a year ago regarding transgender protections, and they actually upheld particular, change in a law, and that actually surprised quite a few people in the legal realm. But that is another thing to sort of be aware of, is that something that this company is taking seriously? If you can, could
you summarize that ruling?
Yeah, basically it just sort of added transgender identity or gender identity to the same level of protections as for employment reasons as like, race, ethnicity, religion, gender, age, things of those natures. So it's basically just kind of now added to another protected class. So, so if somebody, terminates your employment because they found out that you were transgender, that you're now protected and they can't do that. It'd be the same as they terminate you because you're, Hispanic. I mean, one day and they just decide to do that. So definitely not something to do. Immigration questions are another sort of weird area because you can't really get into it, but they also have to ask you for your your ability to be able to work. So,
sure.
Yeah, there's just a lot of weird areas there. But again, go to the Department of Labor, go to the EEOC websites. They really do a good job of setting out some information for employees. Um, be aware of the kind of the legal side versus practical side here is, and just be aware of who you are as a person. If you feel like somebody's making you uncomfortable in an interview, that's
Mm-hmm.
not going to change, a year down the line, more than likely. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, that could be one of those weird things that creeps into the legal arena as well. Um,
I,
so,
oh, sorry, go ahead. I had
yeah,
another question.
so yeah, just definitely be aware of what classes you may fall into as a protected class, and also just sort of think about like, what if you find people are really kind of going off the rails on questions that they're asking, let that be very, very, guiding for you.
Great. Here's a fun question. How to handle vaccination requirements transitioning from remote to in office?
Yeah. That was all
That's a big one, right?
yeah, we were dealing with that before I transitioned to a software developer, and that's why I was kind of glad I transitioned to a software developer,
Hmm.
because it was going to be it's just a messy legal question.
Hmm.
Um, you have so companies can mandate it to a degree. They have to provide some alternatives. They have to, like that's why you see a lot of places saying, we're going to require it, but if you don't want to be vaccinated, great, you just have to do weekly testing, or I forget like what some of the ones I've read. Um, so as long as they give you that sort of back and forth, like those options, then they can do it. So now the question becomes from like the legal side as far as like what can be mandated, what can't be mandated. So like on the federal level, you're seeing some levels of mandates being added to federal government, military. Those are pretty safe. Those aren't going to really be, no court's really going to set those aside. But from like if you work for a bank, for instance, in the state of Florida, and the bank wants to have a vaccine mandate or a testing mandate, but Florida is now saying nope, or I don't know if they passed it yet, but Texas did, where basically they said that companies can't mandate it. You're going to get into a weird sort of interstate commerce versus, state right sort of arguments. So not clear.
There's no clear cut answer. It depends on
No.
the state. It depends on the locality, the individual situation, and it probably would have to be could be decided in the courts.
Yeah, it's gonna be. I mean, it's already been litigated, and at least it's been in that process. So it just hasn't made it to where it's kind of like that, clear guiding light from like a Supreme Court or anything like that at this point. But it has been many years ago, early 1900s. The Supreme Court decided that governments can mandate vaccinations. So.
Mm-hmm. What if someone, let's say you live in a state that recently legalized marijuana,
Mm-hmm.
and previously your employer, said you can't smoke pot. What about where does that? What have the courts said on that?
I think a lot of employers just haven't really touched it. For the most part, it's kind of one of those just they'll still do it on the sense of you're in a job or there's an accident, like you're driving to a company car to a customer site, and you've got anything in your system that goes against whatever the limits set by that state are. You're definitely running afoul of because you broke laws using company cars. But at the same token, as far as like testing for it, you can, because still technically it's illegal federally.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of HR departments have just said, we're going to avoid that question unless it's like an accident scenario or
Mm-hmm.
something along those lines. But yeah, technically they still can because it's still a controlled substance under federal law. So, and
Okay.
most of these employment things are governed by federal law.
Okay. I don't see any more questions coming in.
Okay.
Do you have any more, aside from legal stuff, just practical tips, inspiration for job search?
Yeah, it's I think one of the things I always tell people is, especially if you're, coming from like sort of the coding boot camp, because most of the people I've mentored, people I teach, they're, all sorts of backgrounds. Like, don't, just because maybe you've got only 18 weeks of coding under your belt, don't forget to sell some of this other stuff that you have. Like, were you a manager somewhere? Were you a customer service rep somewhere? Talk about times where you were like, if you're just out of high school, talk about some of the activities that you did there. Build up who you are as a person in the interview process. Because I don't care if you're coming from like a 4-year degree or this, just prime example before this, I'm working on something called WIQL, which is Microsoft's Azure DevOps query language. Like, I would have never studied that anywhere other than reading the documents now for the job I have. So sell yourself, and sell your coding experience is more of, I enjoy this, I like this, I want to learn more about this, and I'm hoping that I can be an asset to you. Maybe I won't be in the first couple months, but I'll at least be a great team player and help where I can. So yeah, definitely make sure you just don't focus on the coder as much as you focus on the person you are.
Mm-hmm. That's great. There's one other question that came in.
Okay.
This one says, what about civil harassment cases the police won't touch and neither will HR?
I'm trying to think of like civil harassment. If it's somebody, I don't know if the person can follow up, if it's like a coworker or something along those lines.
Yeah, if you ask that question, you want to maybe provide a little more detail.
Yeah, because if it's like a coworker type of scenario, then if it's hostile work environment, those are big sort of legal issues that companies want to avoid. I would probably tell you to consult an attorney on that, because hostile work environment can be somewhat state law driven too, and it's probably best to get like individual advice on that one based on the facts. But yeah, if it's a coworker that's doing that, then you can definitely talk about like a hostile work environment case.
The follow-up was coworker harassing outside my house out of hours.
Yeah, you should definitely talk to your local prosecutor's office or courthouse about filing some sort of civil protective order at that point. Because at that's definitely getting more into like that almost criminal realm of things. But you could still, if your employer is not doing it and they're saying, well, it's off hours, so they're still creating the environment. Highly recommend you talk to an attorney wherever you're at on that one. That's a dangerous situation, and you need to do whatever you can to protect yourself on that one.
Good advice. So seek professional counsel on this for sure.
Yeah, and then in the meantime, find if there's a local agency in your area that'll help you file a civil protective order or civil order of protection. They kind of vary from what they're called, but basically a no contact order. So that way, if the person does show up, the police do have to get involved, because violating that order is typically a new criminal charge.
Great. I didn't expect we'd go down that road, but I'm glad. Yep. I mean, it's a real issue. So whoever asked, I'm glad you asked. I'm glad we had Jeff here to provide some guidance on that.
Yeah, hostile work environments unfortunately are a thing. When I was leaving the legal department, we had a scenario where somebody put a camera in the women's fire department or bathroom, or in the fire department women's bathroom and her locker room. So they're facing a hostile work environment lawsuit right now, and it's not uncommon. Definitely think about those sorts of things too when you're looking or when you're talking to employers. So,
Jeff, this has been really informative and helpful. And yeah, any last words of wisdom?
No, just yeah, same thing I kind of been saying over and over again. Just and I think Renee posted in there too. Is just trust your gut. Yep, just definitely uh, hang on to those feelings if you don't feel like it's going to be a good fit. If you're feeling that early on, then try the interview process with another potential employer.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Okay.
Jeff is, just a reminder, Jeff is a mentor with Prominio. So if you haven't already booked a mentor session, you'll find him on the mentors page in the week 0 course in the learning management system. Jeff is currently teaching the front-end software developer bootcamp for us. If you would like to see more of these kinds of events, please send me a message in Slack if you'd like to see a follow-up to this. If you had more questions, legal questions that weren't answered or we didn't have time to answer, please let me know and maybe we can invite Jeff to come back. Other than that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your week and thanks for coming. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.